In this video, we will be covering lists in Python. First thing, we'll just go ahead and create a list. We'll call this players. And lists are always enclosed in brackets. So I'll just enter a few records here, all separated by a comma. And that is all we need to do to create a list. And we can just use the index value to just grab like for example, the first player. We just go players, and then the index values are all 0 base. So the first item is always going to be 0, followed by 1, 2, 3, and so on. So if we go ahead and print this, it will give us the first name, which is Frank Thomas, out of the list. We can also use the length method to get the count of the items that are in the list. So we'll go ahead and create a variable called count, set that to the length of players. And then if we go ahead and print count, we'll use string interpolation for this. And obviously we have 3 records in that. Getting the last item in the list, we can also use the length and index to do that. So we'll go ahead and set up another print function, players. Since it's 0 base, we'll have to subtract 1 from the length. So if we go length, players, and then subtract 1, that will give us the last player in the list. So the index value is actually 2 because we're starting with 0. So Frank Thomas would be 0, Barry Bonds would be 1, Cal Ripken would be 2. However, there's an easier way to do this. Is if we just pass in a negative value for index, it will start counting from the right. So go ahead and do that on this line. So print players, and then we will pass in a -1. So that should give us the last item in the list also. Now, since it's a list, we can go ahead and loop through them, and that is just as simple as for player. And then we can go ahead and print the player. And if we go ahead and run that, we'll get a different player on each line. Let's say we want to add another player. That is very easy to do using the append method. So we go players.append. And then now if we go ahead and print players, we'll see our new player just got added to the end of the list. We can also use the pop method to remove the last player in the list. That will be players.pop. Then if we go ahead and reprint this, it'll reflect our changes. And now we're back to the original list that we had started with. We can also change the order. There is a method to reverse the order. It is simply the reverse method. Then if we go ahead and do that and reverse the order, Cal Ripken will now be first, and then Frank Thomas will be last. We can also pass in a string value in order to remove. So if we go players.remove, now Cal Ripken, it'll search in the list for the exact same value, and it'll remove that value. We can also use the index value to remove players or remove items from the list. That's using the delete function. So it'd be del. And then what we want to do now is pass the list followed by the index value. So if we do that, and then that'll just leave us with Barry Bonds. Now we went over the append method. There's also an extend method. So we'll go ahead and use that. So we're going to put Cal Ripken back into the list. Now this is a method that you have to be careful with, which I will show the reason here. So what happened was the extend method is expecting an array as to be passed into it. We passed in a string, so it's taken every character as being a value in an array. So in addition to Barry Bonds, each letter is its own item in the array in the list. So we do not want to do that. What we wanted to do instead was pass in Cal Ripken as being a single list item. Basically, this is the equivalent of creating a new array with one item, or a new list, with one item in it. And if we go ahead and do that, we get the result that we expected. So now we have the list with Barry Bonds and Cal Ripken in it. Okay, so now we're going to create a new list of just pitchers. So Greg Maddux and Roger Clemens. Now let's say we want to add the pitchers to the players or to the players list. We could do something like this. We can go for P in pitchers. Players.append. We can use the append method. So if we did that, it would certainly work. As you can see, now we have the pitchers added to the original players list. There is a better way. So we just use the extend method to pass in one item. So now that we have pitchers in its own list, all we would need is players.extend and then pitchers. And we should get the same result, in which we do. Now in this next example, we're going to go ahead and add a duplicate. We're going to add Roger Clemens again. And then we'll see that he is now in there twice, the last two items. So what we can do now, let's say he's in there twice. We only want him in there once. We can use there's also a method, a remove method that is part of the list. And then if we go ahead and print that, so now we're back to where we were before, where Roger Clemens is in the list only once. So for the next example, we will need to reverse the players. If you notice that they just so happen to be in alphabetical order by coincidence. So let's go ahead and reverse the list again. Okay, now we're kind of in reverse alphabetical order. So with a list of strings, Python makes this very easy. We can sort this in alphabetical order simply by calling the sort method. And since it's a list of strings, it will know what to do. So now we're back to it's sorted in alphabetical order by the first names because we gave it just a list of string values. There's also a copy method that for many situations comes in handy, and all we need to do is call players.copy. And if we go ahead and print the copy, we should have exactly the same thing. Now let's go and just pop one item off of players. Now this should work for this situation. This is the copy method is what's referred to as shallow copy. There's also deep copy. We'll get into that in a later video, the differences between the two. But in this simple example, we can just create a copy of our players to keep the original in case we have to revert back to it later. So we can always go ahead and call the clear method to return us to an empty array. And in order to restore, all we need to do is players equals copy.copy. And so we can use our copy to restore. Another handy feature is the use of indexing to get a subset of our list. So let's say we want to just print out the first two items. That Python lists make that very easy. So let's go ahead and print players, and we can just go from the index value from 0 to 2, and it'll give us the first item. So Barry Bonds and Cal Ripken. By default, so there's a more concise way to do this. By default, we can just use players, and so the 0 will be implied. By default, since we did not have a value, we just go :2, and we will get the same result. So we can also start at a different starting point. You go from 2 to 4. Fourth item will be the last item, the end item. We can also start with 2 and go to the end, and that will give us the same as explicitly defining the last item. Next example, we will create a list of numbers, and this goes to show it doesn't matter what data type consists in the list. We can have multiple data types, we can have them all the same. Python does not care either way. So we created a list of numbers. We can go ahead and sort these also. As you recall, the last time we called the sort method, we were sorting a list of strings which were players' names, and that was by default in alphabetical order. And since they are all numbers, Python will automatically know what to do and sort it in ascending order. Now, since Python does not care about data types inside of a list, we can go ahead and create a complete list. We're going to start off by setting that to an empty list. And we will go ahead and extend with the players. And we'll do the same thing with the numbers. So we go ahead and print this. Now we have a mix and match. We have all the players first, followed by the numbers. However, if we went to try and sort this, that is going to give us an error just because we are trying to match integers and strings, which obviously it's not going to know if 0 is supposed to come before Cal Ripken or Barry Bonds or whatever. So in order to use the smart sorting that Python automatically gives to you, you have to be careful that each item in the list is of the same type.